It is not from the benevolence of the butcher, the brewer, or the baker that we expect our dinner, but from their regard to their own interest. Adam Smith wrote those words nearly 300 years ago, and in doing so, quietly changed how the modern world understands itself. They sound simple, almost cynical. But behind them lies one of the deepest questions ever asked about human society. How do millions of strangers cooperate without love, without orders, without a king? This audiobook is an attempt to answer that question by returning to its source. In Adam Smith, The Birth of Capitalism, we are not here to praise markets, and we are not here to condemn them. We are here to understand them. How they emerged from older worlds of land, empire, and tradition. How specialization multiplied productivity. How trade coordinated strangers. And how a system built on self-interest could still claim to serve the common good. But this is not just an economics audiobook. We will explore Smith's moral psychology, sympathy, conscience, and the impartial spectator. The ideas most people skip, yet without which his economics makes no sense. We'll follow capitalism as it goes global, entangled with empire, credit, crisis, and revolution. We'll see why Smith feared monopoly, demanded education, distrusted merchants when they captured the state, and warned that prosperity without moral restraint could hollow a society from the inside. Along the way, we'll place Smith in conversation with his critics, especially Karl Marx, not to declare a winner, but to understand why capitalism has always produced both wealth and tension. This audiobook is designed for calm, long-form listening, something you can live inside rather than rush through. A quick note for your listening experience. We only include ads in the first 20 minutes of this video. After that, the audiobook plays uninterrupted. If you value deep, distraction-free explorations like this, please consider liking the video and subscribing. It genuinely helps us continue building projects like this here at the Infinite Archive. This is not a story about money alone. It is a story about how human beings try to live together without a king. Let's begin. Chapter 1. Before Adam Smith. Old Wealth, New World. Before Adam Smith, Europe believed it already understood wealth. Wealth was not factories. It was not productivity. It was not how much a nation could make in a day. Wealth was treasure, gold, silver, bullion, metal you could lock in a vault and guard with guns. The dominant economic logic in the 1600s and early 1700s was called mercantilism. Under mercantilism, a nation wasn't trying to make the world richer. It was trying to make itself richer at the expense of everyone else. If Britain had more gold than France, Britain was winning. If Spain had more silver than Britain, Spain was winning. That was the scorecard. So governments behaved like hoarders. They tried to pull money in and keep money from leaking out. Here's how that looked in practice. First, colonies. European powers carved up the world and treated their colonies as captive suppliers. Sugar from the Caribbean, tobacco from Virginia, cotton and tea from India. The rule was simple. The colony sends raw stuff to the mother country, and the mother country turns it into finished goods. Then, and this is important, the colony was usually forced to buy those finished goods back from the mother country. at the mother country's price. So the wealth moved in one direction, upward, homeward. Second, monopolies. The state would hand exclusive trading rights to certain companies, the East India Company, the South Sea Company, and others like them. These weren't normal companies. These were state-backed machines. They had charters, privileges, sometimes even their own armies. If you were not in the club, you were legally shut out. That's mercantilism, not free trade, but controlled trade, fenced trade, trade as a weapon. Third, protection. Imports were often blocked or taxed heavily. Foreign competition was treated like a military threat. The logic was, if we let outsiders sell here, gold will leave our country. We will get weaker. So governments passed tariffs, bans, navigation laws, shipping rules, all designed to trap wealth inside national borders. Imagine trade like a maze with armed guards at every turn. That's how Europe ran its economies. This system rewarded conquest, not efficiency. You didn't have to be the best producer. You just had to have the strongest navy. If you could take someone else's port, force someone else's ship to unload for you, block someone else's merchants from entering a region, you could get rich. This is why European powers fought naval wars over islands most of their citizens could not point to on a map. These weren't small wars. They were balance sheet wars. But buried under that logic is something dark. Because if wealth is just whatever we can grab and keep, then human beings, entire populations, become instruments. Colonies weren't partners. They were extraction zones. People weren't citizens. They were labor supplies. Whole regions existed to feed the center. That was normal thinking. That was respectable thinking. No one in power felt embarrassed about it. So when Adam Smith is born in 1723, this is the world he inherits. An economic system where the crown decides who is allowed to trade, where companies are chosen favorites of the state, where wealth is measured like loot, where the goal of policy is not let everyone flourish, but don't let the other empires eat before we do. And here is where the crack starts. Even in Smith's early lifetime, Britain and Scotland are becoming richer, dramatically richer, than you would predict just from plunder and monopoly. Something else is generating wealth. Something new. Not treasure seized, not taxes imposed, not ships hijacked. Something is happening inside production itself. And that, quietly, is the beginning of the revolution. By the time Adam Smith reaches adulthood, the quiet cracks in the old world have widened into full fault lines. The air in Britain hums with invention. In coal mines, steam engines pump water from the shafts. In workshops, spinning frames and looms multiply output. On canals, barges carry raw materials to towns that never used to matter. Trade routes weave the globe tighter, from the Caribbean to Calcutta, from Glasgow to Virginia. Cities are swelling. Glasgow, once a modest town on the River Clyde, becomes a trading metropolis. Its merchants, The tobacco lords build palaces from colonial profits. London grows into the nerve centre of credit and insurance. Even remote Scottish towns are being pulled into a network of money, goods, and ambition. The age of the craftsman is fading. The age of the merchant, the banker, and the engineer is beginning. For the first time, ordinary people can feel the pulse of change in their lives. A farmer's son might move to the city and earn wages instead of paying rent. A small trader could become rich without a title or land. The very definition of success is shifting from inheritance to enterprise. But it's not just progress, it's pressure. Cities are crowded and filthy. Labor is long and brutal. Families that once lived by the rhythm of seasons now live by the clock of the factory bell. And the gap between the rich merchant and the working poor grows visible and painful. The world feels both thrilling and unstable. For every new ship leaving port, another business collapses under debt. For every new invention, 100 old livelihoods disappear. People can sense that wealth is no longer static. It moves, multiplies, and vanishes. No one quite knows why, but someone is about to ask. In this turbulent world, Adam Smith begins to see a pattern and a mystery. He notices that Britain and Scotland are producing more than ever before. Output, trade, comfort, all rising. And yet, the average worker's life is not obviously better. Abundance exists alongside poverty. Progress brings insecurity. The rich grow richer, but not always through cruelty, often simply by understanding the system first. Smith starts to wonder, what is actually creating this wealth? Not the gold itself. That's just the scorecard. Not the king's policies. They can't explain the surge. Not divine favor. The Enlightenment has already begun to chase superstition away. So what is it? Why do some nations flourish while others stagnate? Why do certain kinds of work multiply wealth while others barely sustain it? And if everyone acts for themselves, how does the whole society not collapse into chaos? These are not rhetorical questions for Smith. They are scientific ones. He is trying to discover the hidden law beneath the marketplace, the invisible rhythm that organizes exchange, effort, and reward. He wants to explain how a society built on self-interest could still produce order, how private ambition might serve public good, how a world run by merchants and manufacturers could still be moral, stable, and free. For most thinkers before him, economics was a branch of politics or theology. For Smith, it becomes a branch of nature, something that has its own rules, like gravity or motion. And by studying those rules, he believes we might finally understand the machinery of wealth, not to glorify it, but to make it just. That question, how does wealth truly arise, will drive everything that follows. It is the birth of a new science and the beginning of the modern world. When Adam Smith sits down to write The Wealth of Nations in the 1770s, He is not trying to invent capitalism. It already exists around him. Ships are sailing, factories are roaring, merchants are gambling on cargo halfway across the world. The machine is running. What no one understands yet is why it runs. Smith's mission is not praise, it's explanation. He wants to open the black box. He wants to know what force turns individual desire into collective order, what makes trade expand, what makes a nation rich. He looks at markets the way a physicist looks at gravity. As a system with rules, we obey even when we don't see them. If we could uncover those laws, we might guide policy not by superstition or greed, but by understanding. To Smith, every prior economic theory is superstition in disguise. Mercantilism says, hoard gold, ban imports, conquer colonies. But Smith sees the evidence. Nations following those rules don't always prosper. Meanwhile, places with freer exchange and rising productivity are pulling ahead. There must be a deeper logic. He suspects the true source of wealth lies not in what governments collect, but in what people produce, in their labor, their skill, their coordination. Wealth, for Smith, is not a treasure to guard. It's an energy to release. This is where his moral philosophy fuses with his economics. Because if human beings are naturally sympathetic, curious, and driven to improve their condition, then the economy should not be a zero-sum contest of greed. It should be a living network of cooperation through self-interest. In that vision, the baker, the brewer, and the butcher are not serving kings or monopolies. They are serving strangers, and in doing so, serve themselves. The miracle is that this private logic can still create public benefit. That's the mystery Smith devotes his life to. How the pursuit of individual improvement can unintentionally organize society into prosperity. How chaos can create order. How freedom can create structure. He calls this pattern the invisible hand. But behind that poetic phrase is an engineer's curiosity, the desire to chart every gear and lever inside the machine of modern life. The wealth of nations is that chart. It's not a sermon for greed or a defense of the rich. It's a map of how work, exchange, and ambition can move together to build or break the world. By the time he finishes, Smith has done something no one else had dared. He has turned commerce into philosophy and morality into economics. And with that, a new age begins. Chapter 2: The Making of Adam Smith. Adam Smith is born in 1723 in Kirkcaldy, a small grey coastal town on the Firth of Forth. At first glance it is provincial, quiet and distant from empire. But beneath that stillness, Scotland is transforming faster than almost anywhere else in Europe. A single lifetime earlier, this was a land of clan feuds, poverty, and religious division. The 1707 union with England had just stitched Scotland into the British state, uneasily, but permanently. At first, many Scots saw it as surrender. Yet within decades, that political union becomes the foundation for an economic miracle. By mid-century, Scotland is unrecognizable. Edinburgh becomes a capital of reason. Glasgow becomes a capital of trade. Inventions, books, and ideas pour out of universities that once served only theology. Printing presses hum, debates overflow into taverns, and a small nation begins producing some of the greatest minds of the Enlightenment. The Scottish transformation is not just intellectual, it's material. Merchants in Glasgow are importing tobacco from the Americas, sugar from the Caribbean, and linen from the lowlands. Banks are forming in towns that had never seen credit before. The Clyde is dredged and widened. Canals slice through farmland to carry goods inland. Commerce is no longer something that happens to Scotland. It is something Scotland is creating. Smith grows up watching this transition, from poverty to prosperity, from superstition to science, from closed guilds to open ambition. He sees a society discovering that knowledge itself can be an engine of wealth. And that realization, that the mind can produce as much value as muscle, will become the heartbeat of his philosophy. When Smith arrives at the University of Glasgow at 14, he enters a world exploding with new thought. This is the Scottish Enlightenment, one of the densest concentrations of genius in modern history. David Hume, the philosopher of skepticism. Francis Hutcheson, the teacher who shaped Smith's moral outlook. James Watt, whose refinements to the steam engine would soon power the Industrial Revolution. Adam Ferguson, Dugald Stewart, Lord Keynes, thinkers dissecting human nature, society, and science all at once. They share a radical conviction that reason, not revelation, can explain the world. That moral order can exist without divine command. That human nature, properly understood, can be studied like any other part of creation, empirically, patiently, through observation. This is the environment that forms Adam Smith. In lecture halls and drawing rooms, philosophy is not a sermon, it's a laboratory. Hume is writing about cause and effect, habit and belief. Smith is reading about sympathy, virtue, and the passions that move men to act. The line between psychology, politics, and economics doesn't exist yet. To them, it's all one inquiry. What makes human beings cooperate? The Enlightenment Circle is more than friendship. It's fuel. They challenge one another, debate endlessly, and demand clarity. It is here that Smith learns to think like a scientist of society, to distrust authority, to test assumptions, and to see patterns where others see chaos. When he later writes about markets, trade, and nations, he is not inventing from nothing. He is extending the same moral experiment the Scottish Enlightenment began. Can human behavior, when left free, still create order? And if so, what kind of order will it be? By his early 30s, Adam Smith is no longer just a student of ideas. He's teaching them. At the University of Glasgow, he becomes Professor of Moral Philosophy, a title that in the 18th century means far more than ethics. In his classroom, Moral philosophy is the study of everything that makes civilization work. Law, politics, psychology, language, justice, and the economy. They all belong to the same conversation. Smith lectures on virtue, self-interest, sympathy, and the invisible threads of social order. His students fill the lecture halls. They come not to memorize doctrine, but to watch a mind build a map of human life. He speaks softly, awkwardly, sometimes pacing, sometimes lost in thought. But what he says reshapes how people think about human behavior. He insists that society has rules, not by decree, but by habit. Rules that emerge from countless interactions, from imitation, approval, and exchange. These rules, he believes, explain how morality, language, and even markets evolve naturally. At night, he walks the streets of Glasgow and sees theory turning into life. Shops stay open later. New goods appear. Prices change with supply and demand. He watches how people negotiate, how they trade, how they adapt. The classroom becomes the laboratory. The city becomes the data. And Smith, ever the observer, begins to see connections between the smallest act of exchange and the vast structures of the nation. This is where his two great books begin to form in outline. The Theory of Moral Sentiments, how humans feel for one another, and The Wealth of Nations, how those feelings, when channeled through markets, can generate prosperity. In Smith's mind, they are not separate works. They are two halves of one question. How do self-interest and sympathy together build society? While Smith lectures about virtue and exchange, Glasgow is living proof of what he's describing. The city has become one of the busiest ports in Europe, the beating heart of a new global economy. The tobacco lords dominate the skyline with their mansions, built from fortunes made on colonial trade. Ships arrive from Virginia and Maryland, loaded with tobacco, sugar, cotton. Warehouses overflow. Dock workers move cargo day and night. Every transaction is financed by credit, notes, bills, and promises that circle the Atlantic faster than any ship can sail. This is capitalism being born, not as theory, but as smell, sound, and sight. You can hear it in the hammers of the shipyards. You can smell it in the molasses and tar along the quays. You can see it in the counting houses, where merchants gamble on prices months ahead, buying cargo they haven't yet seen. Money is no longer metal. It's trust. Wealth is no longer land. It's movement. A man's worth depends less on what he owns and more on what others believe he can deliver. Smith walks through this world like a field anthropologist. He notes how self-interest, competition, and cooperation coexist. He observes that the market has its own language, prices, contracts, reputation, a moral code built without priests or kings. Yet he also notices the fragility. A missed shipment, a rumor, or a fall in confidence can collapse the whole chain. Beneath the wealth lies risk, and behind the risk, human emotion, fear, trust, greed, hope. For Smith, Glasgow is not just home, it's a case study. Here, he sees the living experiment of modern commerce. How private ambition, when multiplied across thousands of people, starts to organize society more efficiently than any government decree. He doesn't glorify it, but he can't ignore its power. It's the new energy of the age, and he's determined to understand its laws. Then, just as Scotland seems unstoppable, the illusion of endless growth shatters. In 1772, a credit bubble bursts. Scottish banks, flush with optimism and paper promises, begin to fail. Merchants who had borrowed heavily to finance transatlantic trade find themselves suddenly insolvent. Ships are still sailing, goods still in motion, but money, the lifeblood of this system, freezes overnight. The Air Bank, one of the most ambitious institutions of the time, collapses spectacularly. Dozens of smaller lenders follow. Credit evaporates, wages vanish, trade stalls. In a matter of months, fortunes disappear, reputations disintegrate, and Glasgow's merchants go from kings to beggars. Smith watches the unraveling with a kind of grim fascination. The very people who had seemed invincible are undone not by war or famine, but by mathematics, by the compounding of debt and expectation. The crash spreads through Britain and across the Atlantic. Investors in London panic. Colonial exporters are ruined. Confidence, that invisible glue of commerce, melts away. For Smith, this is more than an economic event. It's a revelation. He sees that prosperity based on speculation can collapse under its own speed. That credit, while powerful, is built on trust. And when trust breaks, the whole system convulses. When the Wealth of Nations finally appears in 1776, these memories are still raw. Behind every page lies the lesson of 1772, that markets are not gods. They are human creations, ingenious, productive, but fragile. The invisible hand, he now knows, can guide or strangle, depending on how the system is built. Through all of this, the rise of industry, the brilliance of the Enlightenment, the chaos of collapse, one question keeps echoing in Adam Smith's mind. Can a society built on private ambition and trade remain stable, moral, and free? He has seen the power of markets to create abundance, but also their ability to concentrate wealth and risk. He has seen the intelligence of ordinary people at work, inventors, merchants, laborers, but also the ignorance of elites who mistake privilege for genius. He has seen how trust can bind millions of strangers together, and how panic can tear them apart overnight. To Smith, this is not just an economic puzzle. It is a moral one. If we are to live in a commercial society, one not held together by kings, priests, or armies, then we must understand the natural laws of cooperation. How does self-interest become social good? How does freedom avoid collapse into greed? How can a society organize itself without a master and still work? Those are the questions that make The Wealth of Nations more than an economics book. They make it a moral blueprint for the modern world, a study of how human nature, when left to seek its own improvement, can accidentally build a civilization. And that is the mystery Adam Smith devotes his life to exploring. The hidden order within human freedom, the moral heartbeat inside the marketplace. Chapter 3: Moral Sentiments: How Humans Hold Society Together. Before Adam Smith wrote The Wealth of Nations, he wrote The Theory of Moral Sentiments. If wealth is about how societies create prosperity, moral sentiments is about how they stay human. Smith begins with a simple observation. Even the most selfish man cannot watch another person in pain without feeling something move inside him. That stirring, that faint echo of another's emotion is what Smith calls sympathy. Not pity, not charity, but the imagination that lets us feel what others feel. For Smith, sympathy is not rare. It is the default wiring of human nature. We are born to read faces, to mirror voices, to sense approval and disapproval in others. It's how we learn to speak, to share, to belong. Every emotion is social. Our joy depends on being seen. Our shame depends on being judged. Even solitude makes sense, only because we know what it means to others. This is Smith's quiet revolution. He replaces divine command with human perception. Morality, he says, does not need a god to enforce it. It needs only the ability of one mind to imagine another. In that leap of imagination, the moral world is born. Through sympathy, society polices itself. We don't need to be beaten into virtue. We blush our way into it. The approval of others and the dread of their contempt steer behavior more effectively than any law. So when Smith later writes about markets, prices, and trade, this is the foundation he's standing on. That humans are not calculating machines. They are emotional mirrors. And any society that forgets that fact begins to lose its soul long before it loses its balance sheet. But sympathy alone isn't enough. If we only mirrored others' feelings, we would drown in them. We need something steadier, an inner compass. Smith calls it the impartial spectator. Imagine, he says, that inside each of us lives a silent observer, a witness who watches our actions from a distance, as if from across the room. When we're tempted to act cruelly, the spectator's gaze makes us hesitate. When we suffer injustice, it reminds us not to exaggerate our pain. It is the imagined judgment of an ideal bystander, someone fair, honest, and free from our bias. This man within the breast, as Smith calls him, is the core of conscience. We learn him from experience. We internalize the eyes of others until we can see ourselves without flattery. And that internal audience, invisible but constant, keeps civilization intact even when no one is watching. To obey the impartial spectator is to act as if the whole world could see what we are doing. It's the moral version of a market price, a self-correcting signal that rewards fairness and punishes cruelty. Smith's insight is breathtaking for its simplicity. Society doesn't need a tyrant to keep order. It needs people capable of judging themselves. And that, he believes, is the real miracle. That in an age of kings, ordinary humans already carry a little judge inside their hearts. In modern times, people often quote Adam Smith to defend greed. They forget that he spent his first book proving the opposite. When Smith writes that each person naturally seeks to better his condition, he does not mean to crush his neighbor. He means that self-improvement is as natural as breathing, a quiet instinct to do a little better tomorrow than today. This impulse, he argues, is the heartbeat of progress. The farmer plants not only to feed others, but to improve his life. The craftsman hones his trade partly for pride, partly for profit, partly for the respect of his peers. The merchant expands his business not purely from avarice, but from the joy of seeing his plans succeed. Self-interest, in Smith's world, is bounded by sympathy. It's not the cold pursuit of wealth at any cost. It's a desire tempered by awareness of others. A person who improves his own condition without destroying others can lift the whole community. This is why Smith's system works only among moral beings, people who crave dignity, approval, and belonging as much as money. He understood something timeless. A man who wants respect will usually behave better than a man who wants only power, and a society built on the search for respect can thrive even without kings. Yet Smith also knew how fragile that balance is. The same desire for approval that sustains morality can easily corrupt it. He warns that human beings are vain creatures. We crave not just respect, but admiration. And admiration, in every age, tends to flow toward the rich, the titled, the fashionable. The great mob of mankind, Smith writes, are admiring and almost worshipping the rich and the powerful. We bow to their luxury, copy their habits, envy their ease. In doing so, we mistake glitter for goodness. This, he says, is the most universal perversion of moral judgment. We forgive cruelty if it's wrapped in elegance. We despise virtue if it wears rags. Such vanity bends society's moral compass. It teaches the poor to chase appearances, and the rich to believe they are loved for their character, when they are loved for their gold. Smith fears that this idolatry of wealth will rot sympathy at its core. If admiration always follows money, justice will eventually follow it too. So even before he praises markets, he issues a warning. A society that worships success more than virtue will end up confusing value with price. Here lies Smith's most radical idea, that civilization doesn't need constant supervision from above. It doesn't require a priest or monarch to enforce decency. order can arise from the bottom up, from the daily interactions of ordinary people, guided by sympathy, conscience, and pride. Each of us wants to be seen as good. Each of us wants to be treated fairly. And those twin desires, repeated millions of times, create a web of expectations strong enough to hold a nation together. When you pay a fair price, keep a promise, show courtesy, or restrain anger, you're not obeying a law, you're obeying the imagined eyes of others. You are maintaining a contract older than any constitution, the moral order of mutual regard. For Smith, this is what makes commercial society possible. Markets may move money, but manners move markets. Trust is the invisible infrastructure of exchange, and it is built not by government decree, but by the tiny, everyday effort to be honorable. That, he believes, is the real engine of stability. A free society survives, not because everyone is watched, but because most people can watch themselves. But Smith never romanticizes human nature. He knows sympathy can weaken. It depends on closeness, on recognition, on seeing one another as equals. And commerce, powerful as it is, can stretch those bonds thin. In a small village, everyone knows everyone. The blacksmith knows the baker's family, the farmer knows the tailor's story. Work carries faces and names. But in a modern market, exchange happens between strangers. A merchant in London sells to a planter in Jamaica whom he will never meet. A decision in a counting house can ruin lives a continent away. As wealth scales, sympathy shrinks. We start to see people as functions, not neighbors, laborers, customers, debtors, statistics. And when sympathy fades, cruelty becomes efficient. Smith fears that the machinery of trade, left unchecked, will grind empathy out of daily life. He worries about minds dulled by repetitive labor, about morals eroded by greed and imitation. He senses that the invisible hand can work only as long as the invisible heart remains intact. When admiration tilts too far toward wealth and sympathy too far away from poverty, the social glue begins to crack. That's the danger he sees coming. A society rich in things, but poor in feeling. Here is the subtle genius of Adam Smith. He never saw the theory of moral sentiments and the wealth of nations as separate worlds. To him, they are two halves of one system, the moral engine and the mechanical engine of society. Sympathy explains why we cooperate. Markets explain how we cooperate. Without moral sentiment, trade would be impossible. You cannot buy or sell without a baseline of trust, without believing that others will honor contracts, respect property, tell the truth. And that trust comes not from government edict, but from habit, conscience, and mutual regard. Smith's market, then, is not a jungle. It's a moral ecosystem. Prices may coordinate goods, but sympathy coordinates behavior. And the invisible hand, for all its fame, is just a narrow part of a much larger anatomy. a species wired for cooperation, learning to build prosperity through voluntary exchange. He believed a nation could be rich only if its people were decent, and that the decline of decency would one day make the wealth itself hollow. Modern readers often start with the wealth of nations and skip the theory of moral sentiments. But Smith wrote the moral book first, and for a reason. You cannot understand his economics unless you understand his ethics. When he later describes the invisible hand, he is not describing greed. He is describing coordination. And coordination depends on trust, on shared moral expectations, on sympathy. Without that moral foundation, markets become monsters. With it, they become the most flexible system of cooperation humanity has ever built. Smith's vision is not of cold calculation, but of warm equilibrium. A world where people, in seeking their own improvement, continually mirror and moderate one another. That's why his work endures. He wasn't trying to turn humans into traders. He was trying to show that we were always trading feelings, favors, fairness, and that even our economies are built on the oldest currency of all, empathy. Chapter 4. The Division of Labor. Adam Smith begins The Wealth of Nations, not with kings or merchants, but with something humble, a pin factory. He chooses it deliberately, simple, ordinary, and revealing. Imagine, he says, a lone craftsman trying to make pins by himself. He must draw the wire, straighten it, cut it, sharpen the point, attach the head, whiten the surface, and package the product. Each step requires a different motion, a different tool, a different patience. Working alone, he might make a few dozen pins a day, if he is skilled and diligent. Now imagine 10 workers, each assigned to a single step. One draws the wire, another straightens it, another cuts, another grinds the point, another fits the head, and so on. 10 minds, 10 bodies, repeating one narrow task. By the end of the day, those 10 workers can produce not a few dozen, but tens of thousands of pins. This is Smith's great insight in miniature. When labor is divided, output multiplies. 10 ordinary people, organized intelligently, can outperform 100 geniuses working alone. It's not magic, it's method. Smith calls this the division of labor, and he sees it everywhere, in factories, in trades, in entire nations. It is the secret engine of modern wealth, how repetition, coordination, and focus turn time into abundance. From this one example, Smith redefines economics. Wealth is not the gold you hoard, it is the productivity you unleash. And from that first factory floor, the logic of the industrial world begins. The power of the division of labor lies in specialization, the narrowing of human effort into a single, repeatable motion. When a worker performs one operation all day, every day, 3 things happen. First, dexterity. Repetition turns clumsiness into precision. The blacksmith who hammers one shape 1,000 times becomes faster, smoother, more exact. Skill is condensed into muscle memory. Second, time saved. In a traditional craft, moving between tools or steps wastes minutes, hours, even days. In a specialized workshop, no one ever changes tasks. Flow replaces friction. Third, innovation. Smith observes that workers who repeat one task begin to notice small ways to make it easier. They invent shortcuts, tweak tools, and discover efficiencies. Improvement is not always handed down from scholars. It bubbles up from the line. In this way, specialization becomes self-reinforcing. The more we focus, the more efficient we become. The more efficient we become, the more society rewards focus. And soon, what began as one factory becomes an entire economy built on interdependence, each person producing less of more and more of less. Smith marvels at this. For the first time in history, human beings have found a way to multiply their effort without multiplying their exhaustion. By breaking work into parts, they have learned to scale time itself. But even as he praises the miracle, he senses its shadow. To divide labor is to divide minds, and in that division lies both progress and peril. For centuries, nations measured their wealth in treasure, gold, silver, jewels, and land. But Smith sees something revolutionary. A country's true wealth is not what it owns, but what it produces. He writes that the annual labor of every nation is the fund which originally supplies it with all the necessaries and conveniences of life. In other words, prosperity is not a stockpile, it's a flow. The more efficiently a nation turns labor into goods, the richer it becomes. The division of labor magnifies that flow. Each improvement in organization, each increase in productivity, means more goods for everyone, cheaper, faster, and in greater variety. The blacksmith can now afford the tailor's coat. The tailor can afford the baker's bread. The baker can afford the blacksmith's tools. Each worker's specialization feeds another's demand. Through this invisible network of exchange, the wealth of a nation expands without conquest, without hoarding, without kings demanding tribute. Smith calls this the quiet revolution of commerce, a system in which cooperation, not control, becomes the source of plenty. So when he looks at a pin factory, he is not just seeing pins, he is seeing a new definition of civilization itself. One where progress depends not on divine favor or royal policy, but on the creativity and diligence of ordinary people. But progress always has a cost, and Smith is too honest to ignore it. When work is divided, knowledge divides with it. Each person becomes an expert in one sliver of a process, but loses sight of the whole. The pinmaker knows how to sharpen wire, but not how to draw it, melt it, or sell it. The weaver understands the loom, but not the farm that grows the flax or the market that buys the cloth. What once belonged to the mind of one artisan is now scattered across 100 hands. This makes production faster, but understanding thinner. It's as if humanity has built a vast machine whose parts no one fully grasps. Each worker performs a motion perfectly, but the meaning of that motion, how it fits into the great chain of creation, fades from view. Smith admires the productivity this brings, but he also senses the loss, the dignity of craftsmanship, the intellectual satisfaction of seeing a thing from beginning to end, the moral coherence of work that expresses the whole human being. Civilization, he realizes, might grow richer in goods, while growing poorer in awareness. Smith goes further than any economist of his time. He warns that industrial life, left unchecked, could shrink the mind. In one of his most haunting passages, he writes, "The man whose whole life is spent in performing a few simple operations has no occasion to exert his understanding or to exercise his invention. He generally becomes as stupid and ignorant as it is possible for a human creature to become." This is not an attack on workers. It is a defense of them. Smith sees that repetitive labor can dull curiosity, and that when the intellect sleeps, sooner or later, so does citizenship. A nation that prizes productivity but neglects education risks turning its people into extensions of its machines. So he argues, quietly but firmly, that the state must ensure every citizen receives basic education. Reading, writing, arithmetic, and moral instruction. Not luxuries, but necessities for a commercial society to stay free. He knows that the same specialization that makes a nation efficient can also make it obedient. A people so trained to routine, they forget how to think for themselves. And if that happens, the wealth of nations will come at the poverty of minds. The beauty of the division of labor is that it feeds itself. Once specialization begins, a kind of chain reaction follows, a feedback loop between scale and productivity. Smith explains it simply. The division of labor is limited by the extent of the market. The bigger the market, the more finely labor can divide. The more it divides, the more it produces. The more it produces, the cheaper goods become. And the cheaper goods become, the larger the market grows again. It's a virtuous circle. A pin factory serving one town can afford 10 workers. But if its pins can reach a whole country, it can hire hundreds, invent new machines, and drive prices down even further. More buyers mean more sellers. More sellers mean more specialization. A local craft evolves into a national industry, and the national industry begins to shape civilization itself. This, Smith realizes, is how capitalism scales, not through decree, but through momentum. Once exchange spreads beyond the village, the entire system accelerates under its own logic. A simple truth hides inside this law. Human cooperation, once freed from boundaries, multiplies exponentially. Every new market connection is a new form of shared intelligence. Yet Smith, ever the moral philosopher, refuses to mistake progress for justice. He knows that while specialization enriches nations, it does not automatically ennoble lives. Factories multiply goods, but not necessarily dignity. The shoemaker who once owned his craft now becomes a wage earner, repeating one motion. The merchant grows wealthy, the worker grows dependent. Smith's genius is to hold both truths in one frame, that the system creates unprecedented abundance and that abundance can coexist with degradation. He doesn't rage against this. He diagnoses it. He knows the machine of commerce cannot run without labor, and yet that same machine can render labor invisible. He sees the paradox that will haunt capitalism forever, that the wealth of nations often rises on the weariness of their people. In Smith's moral geometry, this imbalance is not destiny, it's a warning. A healthy market requires not just production, but participation. The worker must remain a citizen, not a cog. The division of labor is limited by the extent of the market. That single line, tucked quietly in Smith's text, may be one of the most profound in economic history. It means that efficiency depends on connection. No matter how skilled a factory becomes, it can't expand unless there are buyers. A weaver in a small village can only weave so much. A weaver connected to a global trading port can supply the world. Markets, in Smith's view, are like lungs. They must breathe freely for production to grow. If tariffs, monopolies, or wars choke off exchange, specialization withers, innovation halts, and prosperity shrinks back into subsistence. This is why he condemns mercantilism and protectionism. Every barrier that narrows the market also narrows the mind. Freedom to trade, he argues, is freedom to evolve. It is the condition that lets human ingenuity compound. But he also implies a deeper truth. Markets are not abstract. They are physical. Ports, roads, ships, letters of credit. Without those arteries, the circulation of wealth stops. So when Smith writes about extent of the market, he is really talking about the reach of human trust, the distance over which people can exchange promises and believe they'll be kept. And that, more than gold or conquest, is what makes a civilization expand. Smith understood something that modern economists still rediscover. Infrastructure is not background. It's the bloodstream of the economy. Without roads, rivers, ports, and reliable post, the market cannot stretch. And if the market cannot stretch, the division of labor cannot deepen. He points to canals slicing through Britain, linking inland towns to coastal harbors. A single canal could cut transport costs by 9/10. making it suddenly profitable to move coal, iron, and grain across the island. Each new connection joined thousands of workers who would never meet, turning local trades into national industries. Smith calls these public works the greatest improvements in the productive powers of labor. He sees that good infrastructure isn't luxury, it's leverage. Every bridge, every paved road, every navigable river extends the market's reach and multiplies specialization. But he's equally clear about who should build them. Private merchants, driven by profit alone, will only fund what serves them directly. So he argues that government, wisely and sparingly, must provide what individuals cannot. Public works are not waste, they are the scaffolding of prosperity. To Smith, infrastructure is destiny because it expands connection. And connection, in his model, is the real engine of growth. The wealth of nations depends less on the richness of their soil and more on the smoothness of their roads. Smith begins The Wealth of Nations with the division of labor for a reason. It is the engine room of everything that follows. Before you can talk about prices, profits, or policies, you must understand how productivity is born, how a single idea, let each man do one thing well, can transform the destiny of nations. This is not just economics, it's anthropology. It's about how human cooperation scales, how ingenuity compounds, how social complexity grows out of simple repetition. By placing this chapter first, Smith teaches us how to read the rest of his book. Every later idea, value, exchange, markets, even the invisible hand, flows from this one insight, that coordination multiplies creation. Once you understand the pin factory, you understand the entire logic of modern life. How billions of strangers, each performing a fragment of a task, can together produce miracles that no king could command. That's why Smith starts here. Because before you can grasp the moral world of sympathy, or the financial world of trade, you must first understand the mechanical world of work, the rhythm, the repetition, and the astonishing power of divided labor. Chapter 5: Markets, Exchange, and the Birth of the Economic Man. In every age and culture, human beings have found ways to survive. But only one species has made exchange its defining instinct. Adam Smith begins this chapter with a simple observation. Man is the animal that has a natural propensity to truck, barter, and exchange one thing for another. Other creatures cooperate. Wolves hunt together, bees share labor, but none of them bargain. None say, "Give me what I want, and you shall have what you want in return." This, Smith says, is the quiet genius of our kind. We negotiate instead of stealing. We persuade instead of commanding. We trade instead of fight. Exchange is how humans transform difference into connection. One man has surplus grain, another has spare cloth. Each lacks what the other can provide. By agreeing to swap, both are better off, and society becomes richer, not by conquest, but by conversation. For Smith, trade is not a corruption of human nature. It is human nature. Our ability to recognize one another's needs, to imagine the desires of strangers, to balance mine against yours. These are the foundations of civilization. And from that small act of mutual persuasion, the entire architecture of the modern world begins to rise. Smith captures this instinct in his most famous example: the butcher, the brewer, and the baker. We do not get our dinner, he writes, from the benevolence of the butcher, the brewer, or the baker, but from their regard to their own interest. The butcher does not feed you out of love. He feeds you because you pay him. You do not buy his meat out of charity, but because you hunger. Each appeals to the other's self-interest, and both leave satisfied. This is not cynicism, it's realism, and it's what makes the market so powerful. Instead of depending on generosity or authority, people can depend on mutual advantage. The system works because we have learned that helping others to help ourselves is far more reliable than begging or coercion. In this small pattern, a fair exchange between equals, each pursuing his own ends, Smith sees the seed of an entire economic order, one that doesn't need kings to command or priests to bless each transaction. Every trade, no matter how small, is an act of coordination, a moment when private wants produce public order. To explain this new order, Smith introduces one of the most enduring and misunderstood inventions in intellectual history: the economic man. This man is not flesh and blood. He is a model, a simplified version of us, stripped down to logic and interest. He is rational, calculating, always seeking to improve his condition, always balancing cost against gain. Smith knows real people are more complicated. We love, envy, forgive, waste, and dream. But to study society as a system, he needs a clean lens. Just as physics studies ideal spheres rolling on frictionless planes, economics, he believes, can study humans as if they were consistent and predictable pursuers of self-interest. The point is not to deny emotion, but to reveal the invisible order beneath it. To show that even when individuals act for themselves, they can still produce patterns of harmony. Later generations will take this model too literally, turning Homo economicus into a myth of cold rationality. But for Smith, it's simply a tool, a way to see the logic within the chaos of exchange, a sketch of human behavior seen through the lens of the market. Through that sketch, he begins to draw the first coherent picture of the modern economy, a world where cooperation no longer depends on kinship or command, but on the universal language of self-interest. Once exchange becomes routine, something astonishing happens. Society begins to communicate through prices. No king decrees what bread should cost. No minister commands how much iron to forge. Yet somehow, through countless transactions, values emerge as if by consensus. Prices, Smith explains, are signals. They tell producers what the world wants and tell consumers what the world can spare. When a good is scarce, its price rises, inviting more production, discouraging waste. When supply overflows, the price falls, warning producers to slow down. Through these fluctuations, resources drift, gently but decisively, toward their most valued uses. The farmer doesn't need to know global grain demand. He only needs to see the price of wheat. The price carries the message. To Smith, this was nothing short of miraculous, a decentralized form of intelligence, millions of decisions coordinating without anyone commanding. It's the moral equivalent of language, an emergent order that lets strangers cooperate, without ever meeting. Here, Smith takes another leap. If prices can coordinate goods, then voluntary exchange can coordinate entire societies. Each person acts from self-interest, but in doing so, contributes to a collective balance. The baker buys flour, hires labor, sets a price, not to serve the public, but to survive and thrive. Yet in serving himself, he also serves others, the miller, the farmer, the family that buys his bread. This chain of exchange creates order without design. Goods move where they're needed. Labor moves where it's rewarded. Capital flows where it's useful. Millions of individual choices, none coordinated by central plan, nevertheless weave together into a pattern of interdependence. Smith sees this not as magic, but as mechanism. The invisible hand is his poetic shorthand for a system of natural feedback, self-correcting, adaptive, and surprisingly humane. In the world of voluntary exchange, freedom and order are no longer enemies. They are two sides of the same motion, the dance of countless self-interested minds, discovering, through trade, how to live together. But Smith is too sharp to be blinded by his own optimism. He knows that voluntary exchange is not always a meeting of equals. Freedom to trade, he observes, can hide inequality of power. The employer can wait, the worker cannot. The landlord can refuse rent, the tenant cannot. The merchant can store goods, the hungry cannot. In theory, every transaction is fair, two parties agreeing by choice. In practice, one side often bargains from desperation. Smith writes that masters are always in a kind of silent conspiracy to keep wages low, while workers, if they combine to demand better, are punished by law. He sees clearly that this imbalance is built into the very structure of capitalism. Markets may be free, but people rarely are. To him, this isn't a call to destroy the system. It's a call to recognize its moral tension. freedom, if it is to remain real, must mean more than the liberty of the strong, to wait out the weak. That insight, whispered rather than shouted, is what separates Smith from the cheerleaders of capitalism who came after him. He saw both its beauty and its cruelty, and insisted they were born of the same logic. In Smith's world, the market is still young, a bold experiment, not yet the all-consuming force it will become. He sees its promise, but also its cracks. He understands that the same mechanism, which creates abundance, also hides inequality, that self-interest can produce cooperation, but also exploitation. That freedom to trade can lift nations, but also divide them. He does not yet call it class conflict, but the seeds are there. The worker bound by necessity, the owner cushioned by surplus, the exchange that looks free on paper, but in reality favors whoever can afford to wait. Later thinkers, Marx most of all, will seize on this tension and turn it into revolution. They will say to Smith, "You call it freedom, but look again at who can actually walk away." Smith would not disagree entirely. He knew that markets, left without moral sentiment or fair law, could devour the very trust that made them work. That when sympathy fails and admiration bends toward wealth, trade becomes tyranny by another name. So this chapter, though it hums with optimism, ends in unease. The market is a brilliant invention, but a fragile one. It promises order without command, prosperity without kings, and dignity through exchange. Yet beneath that harmony, Smith already hears the faint discord. A question echoing beneath the triumph of trade. Can a society built on self-interest stay just? Chapter 6. Wages, Profit, and Class Friction. When Adam Smith looks at society, he does not see a single nation working together in harmony. He sees three great orders, each with its own interests, its own voice, and its own power. First, the laborers, those who live by wages. They sell their strength, their time, their attention. Their income ends when their day ends. Second, the masters or employers, those who live by profit. They own the tools, the workshops, the ships, the stock. Their income comes not from labor, but from the surplus generated by others. Third, the landlords, those who live by rent. They own the earth itself, the fields, the mines, the pastures. Their income comes simply from possession, wealth that multiplies while they sleep. Smith does not romanticize any of them. Each class pursues its own advantage. The worker wants higher wages. The master wants lower costs. The landlord wants higher rent. He sees society not as a family, but as a negotiation, a continual balancing of these competing forces. And though the system promises freedom, it is already tilted. Because in every conflict between the rich and the poor, he writes, "The law, like all institutions, has been framed for the defense of the rich." That sentence, quiet, almost whispered, is Smith's recognition that capitalism, even in its youth, is built not only on productivity, but on power. Smith observes something that every modern economist rediscovers. When workers try to raise wages, they are called a conspiracy. When employers collude to suppress them, it is called prudence. He writes that masters are always and everywhere in a sort of tacit but constant and uniform combination. Not to raise the wages of labor. They do not need formal meetings. Shared interest is coordination enough. They simply refuse to outbid one another. Meanwhile, if workers attempt to combine for their own protection, they are met with legal bans, public outrage, and punishment. In 18th century Britain, it was literally a crime for laborers to form unions. Smith is not surprised. The masters, he says, have the advantage in the dispute. They are fewer, wealthier, and can afford to wait. Workers cannot. A few weeks without pay means hunger. This, he concludes, is why the so-called free market of labor is never truly free. The balance of patience, and therefore of power, is permanently skewed toward those who already possess capital. He does not call for revolution. He simply points to the hypocrisy that the very system which preaches liberty begins by denying it to those who need it most. For Smith, a just economy is one where the lowest worker can live in decency. Not luxury, but security, nourishment, and pride. The wages of labor, he writes, must at least be sufficient to maintain the laborer and to enable him to bring up a family. If wages fall below this, the nation itself begins to rot from within. He defines a good society not by its mansions, but by its subsistence line. When the poor can eat well, dress decently, and educate their children, the whole country is stable and industrious. When they cannot, crime rises, health declines, families break, and resentment festers into rebellion. To Smith, rising real wages are not a threat to prosperity. They are its proof. He sees them as the most honest measure of national strength, a sign that productivity gains are being shared, that wealth is circulating instead of calcifying. A society where the poor live better each decade, he believes, is a society that can last. But a country where only the rich flourish is one waiting quietly for its reckoning. Every business, Smith explains, lives by a simple equation. Revenue, wages plus costs, equals profit. Profit is not a mystery. It is what remains after everyone else has been paid. And because it is a remainder, it must be protected. The master's interest, therefore, lies in keeping wages and costs as low as possible. It is not malice, it is mathematics. The owner's survival depends on efficiency, control, and prudence. But prudence, Smith warns, easily becomes parsimony. To preserve margin, the employer pressures the worker, squeezes the supplier, lobbies the state for favorable terms. The rate of profit, he writes, is always highest in the countries which are going fastest to ruin. High profits often mean exploitation or monopoly, a few gaining at the expense of many. Smith is not anti-profit. He simply insists that profit must serve productivity, not domination. When the motive of gain outruns the motive of creation, the economy stops serving the public and begins to feed on it. In every negotiation between master and worker, Smith sees an uneven field. The worker's weapon is refusal, but refusal costs him bread. The master's weapon is delay, and delay costs him nothing. This patience gap is the root of power. Smith notes that employers can easily hold out during disputes, while workers, living week to week, are unable to support themselves for even a few days. Law and custom magnify that imbalance. The state, aligned with property, enforces order on labor, but rarely on capital. Riots are punished, lockouts ignored. To Smith, this is not accident. It is structure. He is blunt about the cost. A laborer, overawed by his master's authority, lives under constant discipline. The threat of unemployment is a leash. The fear of hunger, a quiet command. And yet, he sees no alternative but reform within the system. Markets can be moral, but only if they remain human. The goal is not to erase hierarchy, but to ensure that ambition doesn't become cruelty. Here Smith's brilliance shows again. He sees a danger invisible to his contemporaries, that a nation obsessed with lowering wages will eventually strangle its own demand. Factories multiply goods, but who will buy them if the workers cannot afford what they make? The wealthy can only consume so much. It is the middle and lower classes whose collective spending sustains the system. If wages are too low, he implies, the market shrinks. You cannot have growth without customers, and customers are born from dignity, from people earning enough to participate. This insight, quietly revolutionary, prefigures the later ideas of Keynes, Ford, and even Marx. Smith sees that capitalism, left to pure self-interest, tends to undermine itself. He envisions a healthier cycle. Fair wages means higher demand. Higher demand means more production. More production means shared prosperity. Not moral charity, but pragmatic sustainability. For him, this is not sentimentality. It's physics. An economy that feeds only the top will collapse under its own imbalance because no engine can run on exhaust alone. Smith never treats inequality as a purely economic issue. He knows that wealth does not just buy comfort, it buys influence. The rich and the powerful, he writes, are heard with attention and respect. The poor man is spurned, even when he is in the right. In every country, those who possess property shape the laws that protect it. Policy is written not from a neutral view of justice, but from the perspective of ownership. Merchants and landlords, he observes, will always have more understanding of their own interest than of the public. They petition for tariffs, monopolies, and privileges, not to advance the nation, but to advance themselves. What begins as a marketplace gradually hardens into an oligarchy. Wealth organizes, speaks with one voice, and writes rules in its own favor. And as wealth concentrates, power follows. Smith sees clearly that economic systems produce political tendencies. As profit accumulates, democracy erodes. The law becomes a mirror reflecting not morality, but money. That is why he insists that justice, not mere growth, must be the foundation of a commercial nation. Smith's writing often feels torn between admiration and sorrow. He admires the productive miracle of industrial society, but mourns what it does to the spirit of its workers. Factories hum, wealth expands, cities glitter. Yet the average laborer grows smaller inside his own life. His body is trained, his time divided, his purpose reduced to output. Can a nation truly be rich, Smith asks, if most of its people feel exhausted and replaceable? What is progress if it empties the soul that built it? He doesn't romanticize poverty or leisure. He simply insists that human dignity is part of a nation's wealth, a form of value not counted in coin. For Smith, the test of an economy is not its exports, but its citizens' sense of worth. If abundance comes with alienation, then something in the moral machinery has gone wrong. True prosperity, he implies, is when work enlarges the mind instead of diminishing it, when progress feels human, not mechanical. This chapter is where Adam Smith ceases to be a prophet of markets and becomes their moral anatomist. He has shown how labor creates wealth, how trade coordinates freedom, how specialization multiplies output. Now he shows the shadow those miracles cast. He is not blind to class conflict. He predicts it. He understands that capitalism contains within it the seeds of tension between those who work, those who own, and those who rule. He believes a stable society requires balance, profit without cruelty, efficiency without dehumanization, law without favoritism. Smith is no revolutionary. He does not want to destroy the system he has mapped. He wants to discipline it, to remind the rising commercial world that freedom and fairness must grow together, or both will wither. This is why reading Smith honestly means reading him completely. He is not the voice of greed. He is the conscience of capitalism. Chapter 7: The Invisible Hand. At the center of the wealth of nations lies one of the most elegant and misunderstood ideas in history, that people pursuing their own gain can, without intending it, create benefit for all. Smith calls this strange harmony the work of an invisible hand, a metaphor for the unseen order that arises when countless individuals act from self-interest, not malice or charity, but simple pursuit of improvement. Each merchant seeks profit, each craftsman seeks steady work, each farmer seeks a fair price. Yet in chasing their separate goals, they collectively weave a functioning society. No one plans the pattern, no one commands it. And yet, through the free interplay of prices, ambition, and exchange, the public good quietly emerges from private motives. It is the most radical promise of Smith's philosophy that order does not require obedience and progress does not require a planner. In a world weary of kings, he offers a new faith, that the everyday pursuit of honest self-betterment can, through its own logic, become the engine of civilization. The invisible hand is not mystical, it is mechanical. Smith explains that in a competitive market, waste is punished and efficiency rewarded. If one producer charges too much, buyers go elsewhere. If one merchant misjudges demand, he loses money. If a craftsman invents a better method, he gains customers. These constant adjustments, tiny, relentless, and self-correcting, form the quiet intelligence of the market. Prices are the messengers. They tell us what is scarce, what is valued, where labor and resources should flow. A rise in price pulls effort toward shortage. A fall in price pushes it away from excess. Out of millions of self-interested decisions, a kind of balance arises. Not perfect, but astonishingly adaptive. To Smith, this coordination through competition is more powerful than any royal decree because it runs on reality, on feedback, not fantasy. It is not a utopia. It is a process, a living system of incentives that, when left to breathe, guides human effort more efficiently than any centralized mind could ever hope to. Smith never says greed is good. He never worships profit, never treats the invisible hand as divine. He is describing a mechanism, not a morality. The power of the market, in his eyes, is not that it makes people virtuous, but that it allows ordinary self-interest to produce useful results without requiring virtue. It is a system that channels flaws, ambition, envy, desire into productivity. It takes human imperfection as its starting point and finds order within it. But Smith's insight is also a warning. The invisible hand is not magic. It doesn't erase injustice. It does not cure greed, and it does not guarantee that every gain is good. Its brilliance lies in coordination, not conscience. He believed that decentralized decision-making, when guided by fair laws, open competition, and moral restraint, can outperform the commands of kings. But remove those restraints, and the same mechanism that feeds a nation can just as easily consume it. Smith returns to his earlier scene: the butcher, the brewer, and the baker. He reminds us we rely on them not because they love us, but because they love themselves. They seek profit, stability, and respect. And in seeking those things, they feed the entire community. When the baker rises before dawn to knead his dough, he's not driven by charity. He wants to earn a living, to support his family, to keep his reputation. Yet in doing so, he provides a public good: fresh bread for everyone else. This is Smith's genius. He finds morality not above the market, but inside it. The system works not by suppressing self-interest, but by connecting it to the needs of others. Through trade, private desire and public benefit become entangled. No government orders the baker to bake. No church tells him it's holy. He simply follows his own purpose, and by doing so, keeps others live. It is the miracle of interdependence, the pursuit of the self, that sustains the whole. Smith is clear: the invisible hand only works under certain conditions. It is not an excuse for chaos or greed. It depends on free competition, open information, and moral constraint. If markets are rigged, if monopolies choke out rivals, if corruption tilts the field, then the invisible hand falters. It depends on trust. Prices must reflect truth, contracts must be honored, and law must treat rich and poor alike. When those conditions fail, when power silences competition or hides information, the market no longer guides society. It distorts it. Smith admired merchants, but he distrusted mercantilists, those who sought privilege through policy. He warns that whenever businessmen gather, the conversation ends in a conspiracy against the public. He believes in freedom, but he knows freedom without fairness becomes another form of tyranny. Centuries later, Smith's metaphor will be torn from its context, polished into a slogan, and used to sanctify every form of profit. Politicians, economists, and CEOs will quote the invisible hand, as if it were scripture, proof that anything making money must be good, and any interference by the state must be evil. But this is not Smith. He never meant the hand to bless greed. He meant it to describe balance, a mechanism that works only when held within moral and legal bounds. He would have looked at modern monopolies, predatory finance, and captured governments, and seen not freedom, but failure. He knew that when power concentrates, the invisible hand turns into an iron fist. So his lesson remains urgent. Markets are brilliant servants, but terrible masters. They coordinate effort, but they cannot define virtue. The invisible hand was never meant to replace conscience, only to remind us that, under the right conditions, human striving can serve more than itself. Chapter 8: The role of the state. Adam Smith has been called the father of laissez-faire, but he was never an anarchist of markets. He believed in limited government, not absent government. A state intelligent enough to enable prosperity, but restrained enough to avoid strangling it. Smith knew that markets are extraordinary at coordinating production, but they cannot build the ground beneath them. Trade requires peace, trust, and infrastructure. Things individuals cannot create alone. So while he praises freedom of enterprise, he also insists that the state has a duty to build, to defend, to educate, and to ensure justice. His vision is neither socialist nor libertarian. It is pragmatic, a balance of roles. The invisible hand, he knew, needs an invisible framework to work within. That, he writes, is where government belongs, not commanding the market, but cultivating the soil in which it grows. Smith begins with what he calls public works and institutions. Roads, bridges, canals, harbors, the arteries of commerce. He observes that private enterprise rarely builds these on its own. The profits are too distant, the coordination too complex. No single merchant can finance a canal that benefits everyone. Yet without it, the market shrinks. So, he argues, the state must step in, not to enrich itself, but to enable trade. He writes that the erection and maintenance of public works is one of the chief duties of government, for they facilitate commerce in a way that could never repay the expense to any individual. Every paved road, every port dredged, multiplies the extent of the market, and therefore the division of labor. In this, Smith prefigures modern infrastructure economics' public investment as the foundation of private prosperity. To him, public works are not charity. They are catalysts, the quiet architecture behind every visible act of enterprise. Before any nation can prosper, it must survive. Smith puts national defense at the top of the state's duties. Trade, he says, requires security. Because no one invests, builds, or plans in fear of invasion or collapse. He admires Britain's commercial navy, which doubles as protection for its merchants. He calls defense of much greater importance than opulence. Without safety, wealth means nothing. But he also sees the danger of militarism, of states that use defense as pretext for endless spending and empire. He urges moderation, a defense strong enough to guard freedom, but not so dominant that it consumes it. The purpose of the soldier is to make trade possible, not to replace it. For Smith, the sword is a necessity, but the plow and the port are what make civilization endure. After defense, Smith places justice as the next great pillar of government. Without justice, he says, commerce collapses. No market can function if people cannot trust contracts, if property can be seized, or if promises mean nothing. He writes that justice is the main pillar that upholds the whole edifice. It is the invisible skeleton that lets strangers cooperate. The rule of law transforms suspicion into trust. It allows two men who have never met to exchange goods, credit, and commitments, because they believe the courts will protect them if deceived. Smith's idea of justice is minimalist but profound. It is not to make people virtuous, but to make them secure. The state should protect, not moralize. Its purpose is to ensure that liberty does not become license, that freedom does not turn into the freedom to cheat. In this sense, the court and the marketplace are partners in civilization. Where justice fails, the invisible hand trembles. Here Smith surprises even modern readers. In the age of monarchy and illiteracy, he calls for public education, not as charity, but as necessity. He sees that the same industrial progress that enriches nations can impoverish the mind. In the division of labor, a man may perform one narrow task all his life until he becomes as stupid and ignorant as it is possible for a human creature to become. So he insists the state must fund basic schooling, reading, writing, arithmetic, and moral instruction, not to make philosophers, but to preserve citizens. Education, he argues, is a public good. It keeps workers thoughtful, voters capable, and society civilized. It is one of the most radical ideas in the wealth of nations, a call to defend democracy before democracy even existed. A nation that trains hands but not minds, Smith warns, will one day find its factories full and its conscience empty. Smith's discussion of taxation is not ideological. It is surgical. He knows the state must collect revenue, but insists that every tax must obey 4 simple principles: fairness, certainty, convenience, and efficiency. A tax should fall in proportion to a citizen's ability to pay. It should be predictable, no hidden tricks. It should be easy to pay and cheap to collect. He warns that taxes must fund what society truly needs: defense, justice, public works, and education, not the vanity of rulers or the greed of courtiers. High taxes, he says, can stifle enterprise, but no taxes leave nations defenseless and ignorant. The art of government lies in balance, in drawing sustenance from the economy without bleeding it dry. For Smith, taxation is not punishment for wealth, but payment for civilization. If there is one group Adam Smith distrusts more than kings, it is monopolists. He saw them everywhere in his time: chartered companies, guilds, trading cartels, men who used state privilege to strangle competition. The proposal of any new law or regulation of commerce, he warns, comes from merchants and manufacturers who have an interest to deceive and oppress the public. Smith despises mercantilism, the doctrine that wealth grows by restricting trade, hoarding gold, and granting monopolies to the powerful. To him, it is corruption disguised as patriotism. When government and merchants merge interests, the invisible hand becomes a clenched fist. He calls for open markets, not because he worships competition, but because monopoly breeds arrogance and waste. When no one can challenge a producer, prices rise, innovation slows, and freedom withers. In Smith's view, the state's duty is not to control business, but to protect the public from those who would control business for themselves. Smith's courage shows clearest in his stance on empire. He writes, "The wealth of nations at the height of British colonial power, when the empire's reach stretched from Bengal to Barbados," and he condemns it. He argues that colonies enrich a few merchants while impoverishing the many. Wars are fought, taxes raised, and lives lost, so a handful of trading companies can secure monopoly profits. The interests of the mother country and her colonies, he writes, are in truth directly opposed. Empire, to him, is bad business disguised as glory, a system that bleeds the public for private greed. He predicts that colonies, once educated and prosperous, will see through the illusion and demand independence. Smith's critique is moral as well as economic. No nation that enslaves others in the name of trade can claim to understand liberty. In this, he is centuries ahead of his time, seeing the fall of empire as the natural consequence of markets discovering their own conscience. For all his appreciation of the state, Smith draws a sharp line. Governments should never try to direct production. He warns that bureaucrats cannot possibly know what millions of individuals know about local needs and opportunities. Central planning, however well-intentioned, turns living markets into rigid machines. He compares the economy to a vast, breathing organism. Every attempt to plan it from above is like trying to make it inhale on command. He does not doubt the good intentions of reformers. He doubts their information. No office in London or Edinburgh, he says, can decide how much cloth to weave in Glasgow, or how much wheat to plant in Yorkshire. The genius of the market lies in its distributed intelligence, its ability to coordinate without central orders. Governments should clear paths, not chart every step. By the end of The Wealth of Nations, Smith draws his boundary clearly. The state must create the conditions for prosperity, peace, justice, education, infrastructure, and prevent predation, whether by tyrants or monopolists. But it must not dictate who bakes bread, what price it sells for, or how many shoes a cobbler makes in a week. He envisions a government that acts like a gardener, not a puppeteer, pruning corruption, planting opportunity, and letting the natural order of exchange grow freely. That, for Smith, Is the golden mean a society where the state is strong enough to protect freedom and wise enough to leave it alone? This is the true architecture of his thought, not an ideology of absence, but a philosophy of balance. Freedom guided by fairness, enterprise sustained by justice, markets flourishing under the quiet, steady hand of an intelligent state. Chapter 9: Global Trade, Empire, and Violence. By the mid-18th century, Scotland, once poor and peripheral, has become a nerve center of the global economy. Tobacco from the American colonies, sugar and rum from the Caribbean, textiles and tools from Britain, and ships circling endlessly between them, all financed through Glasgow's merchant houses and London's banks. Smith walks through this web every day. The warehouses of the tobacco lords rise above the Clyde like temples of a new religion, built on credit, speculation, and slavery. He knows the faces of the men who profit from the plantations, and he knows that every pound of sugar and every hogshead of tobacco carries the hidden cost of human suffering. Meanwhile, far to the east, the East India Company governs entire regions of Asia. Under the banner of trade, private merchants have become imperial powers. Commerce and conquest are no longer opposites, they are partners. This is the world Smith is describing in The Wealth of Nations. A world already global, already capitalist, and already entangled in violence and exploitation. For him, Scotland is not an island of virtue. It is a node in a vast, risky, and morally ambiguous network, a laboratory where he can observe the machinery of empire up close. Despite the shadows, Smith sees the extraordinary potential of trade. Commerce, he argues, is the single greatest multiplier of human prosperity ever discovered. When nations exchange freely, their markets expand, their divisions of labor deepen, and their productivity soars. Each new trading partner adds new demands, which create new jobs, new tools, and new inventions. The baker in Glasgow indirectly feeds the sailor in Virginia, who in turn supplies the merchant in London, who pays the craftsman in Birmingham. The entire world becomes a single workshop, a complex choreography of need and supply. This, for Smith, is the moral argument for commerce. It replaces conquest with cooperation. It binds distant peoples through mutual dependence rather than mutual destruction. He sees in free trade a form of peace, not perfect, not pure, but better than the old cycle of empire and war. If nations would stop chasing gold and start trading goods, he believes the wealth of the world could rise together. Yet Smith cannot ignore the contradiction between the ideals of trade and the reality of empire. Britain calls it commerce, but much of it is coerced exchange. Colonies are forced open by fleets and charters. Local industries are stifled to preserve metropolitan profit. Wealth flows in one direction, from periphery to core, from the colonized to the colonizer. He sees how the logic of the market is entangled with the logic of domination. free trade in practice is rarely free. The liberty of the merchant is paid for by the servitude of the worker and the slave. Smith calls the East India Company a sovereign power under the disguise of a merchant. He condemns its corruption, its monopolies, and its cruelty. He knows it enriches Britain by bleeding Bengal. In his quieter moments, he admits that the prosperity of London and Glasgow rests on the misery of men whose names he will never know. For Smith, the moral question of capitalism begins here. Can wealth built on domination ever be truly stable or truly good? Beneath the movement of ships and goods, Smith sees another invisible current: credit. Planters in Virginia borrow from Scottish merchants to buy enslaved laborers, tools, and land. Those merchants borrow from London financiers who borrow from Dutch banks, who in turn borrow against government debt. It is a web of promises stretched across the Atlantic, linking aristocrats, traders, and slaves in a single circuit of dependency. The planters live in luxury, but on borrowed money. The merchants live on commission, and the banks live on faith. The entire empire is mortgaged to itself. Smith, ever the realist, sees how fragile this is. The prosperity of one colony depends on the solvency of another. One bad harvest, one war, one default, and the whole network begins to shake. He writes that credit is the great wheel of circulation, but also the great source of instability. The empire's apparent solidity hides its hollowness, a house of cards held up by confidence. That confidence finally breaks. In June 1772, the first true global financial crisis erupts. It begins in Scotland, with the collapse of the Ayr Bank and the failure of London speculators. But its shockwaves travel across oceans. Scottish tobacco merchants in Glasgow, American planters in Virginia, and Dutch lenders in Amsterdam all find themselves entangled in the same chain reaction. Ships full of tobacco cross the Atlantic, only to find their creditors bankrupt. Merchants default, banks suspend payments. Paper money, promises on promises, becomes worthless. Smith watches the panic unfold. He sees that the same credit that fuels expansion can, when stretched too far, implode under its own speed. It is the first time the modern world sees what global capitalism can do when trust evaporates. A collapse not of crops or kings, but of confidence. This is not an accident, he realizes. It is the price of connection, the shadow side of interdependence. The 1772 crisis does not stay in Europe. Its aftershocks help ignite a revolution. To rescue the faltering East India Company, the British Parliament passes the Tea Act of 1773. It grants the company a monopoly on selling tea to the American colonies, letting it bypass colonial merchants to recoup its debts. The move enrages colonial traders already strained by credit and taxes. When ships loaded with company tea arrive in Boston Harbor, they are met not by customers, but by protesters. Chests of tea are smashed and dumped into the sea. The British government responds with force, and within 2 years, a financial rescue mission has spiraled into the American Revolution. For Smith, watching from Scotland, this is a profound lesson that economic crises are never only about money. They are about power, trust, and dignity. He sees how debt can become destiny, how the balance sheets of empires can tilt the course of nations. As Smith finishes The Wealth of Nations in 1776, he writes with a mixture of admiration and unease. He has mapped a system capable of producing endless abundance, but he knows that abundance, as it stands, rests on conquest, slavery, and extraction. Britain's prosperity is not innocent. Its ships are built from the profits of plantations. Its cities glow with the wealth of sugar and tobacco, goods grown by people in chains. Smith never moralizes loudly, but his silences are eloquent. He calls slavery the vilest state of mankind, and notes that no system so dependent on coercion can ever call itself civilized. He suspects that nations built on domination carry within them the seeds of their own decay. The moral corrosion that begins in the colonies will sooner or later return home. He believes trade should unite the world through mutual benefit, not divide it through fear and dependence. And he fears that if empire continues to confuse plunder with prosperity, the invisible hand will someday clench into a fist. This chapter is not just history. It is the moment capitalism reveals its true scale. Long before railways or corporations, Smith is describing a global system, goods, labor, and credit moving between continents, boom and bust rippling across oceans, wealth and poverty created in the same breath. He shows that capitalism was global from birth. It did not go global in the 20th century. It was born global in the 18th. The same networks that carried sugar and tobacco carried debt and crisis. Smith's analysis of trade, credit, and empire is the first X-ray of world capitalism, a system brilliant in design but dark in consequence. And his unease still speaks to us, that prosperity built on domination is unstable, that markets without morality drift toward empire, and that global wealth, if not shared, will always summon its own revolt. Chapter 10: The Stationary State and the Future Path. When Adam Smith looked beyond Europe, he saw a paradox in the East, a civilization ancient, vast, and ingenious, yet seemingly frozen in time. He described China as one of the richest, most fertile, best cultivated, most industrious, and most populous countries in the world. And yet, he said, it seems to have long been stationary. Its wealth was immense, but its growth had stopped. It produced enough for stability, but not enough for advancement. The living standards of its people, he noted, had remained unchanged for centuries. To Smith, China represented a mirror for Europe, a warning that progress is not permanent. Even the most organized and productive society can reach a plateau where innovation stalls, and prosperity simply circulates, never expands. He saw in China's stillness the outline of a deeper truth that the machinery of wealth, once perfected, can also ossify. Smith's diagnosis of stagnation is not mystical. It is institutional. He argues that when elites entrench themselves, they transform success into paralysis. Once a ruling class grows comfortable, it begins to guard its privileges, instead of cultivating innovation. Merchants lobby for monopolies. Landlords resist land reform. Guilds block new craftsmen. Every gate that once opened opportunity slowly becomes a wall. The result is a stationary state, a society that still produces wealth, but only enough to sustain the status quo. Energy stops flowing upward. Ambition stops circulating outward. For Smith, this isn't just bad economics. It's moral decay. A dynamic society rewards merit. A stagnant one rewards inheritance. He warns that when power and privilege harden, the invisible hand loses its reach, and the self-correcting rhythm of trade turns into an echo chamber of protection and pride. Smith's gaze turns homeward. Europe, he cautions, must not mistake momentum for destiny. Its growth, dazzling as it seems, depends on openness, on the freedom of people, ideas, and capital to move. If Europe succumbs to the same institutional rot that trapped older civilizations, if aristocrats hoard privilege, if monopolists fence off markets, if education narrows instead of expands, then it too will become stationary. He warns that progress is not automatic. It is fragile, contingent, and always one generation away from reversal. The wealth of nations, he insists, is not measured by their gold, but by their mobility. A nation that stops circulating talent and trust stops growing altogether. For Smith, the future is a moving target. The moment a society decides it has arrived, it begins to decline. Smith lived at the beginning of what we now call the Great Divergence, the moment when Western Europe, led by Britain, pulled dramatically ahead of the rest of the world. In his lifetime, he could already see the early outlines of it. Britain's coal-fueled factories, its efficient markets, its restless innovation, its growing empire of trade. He saw that while older civilizations like China or India had plateaued, Britain was accelerating. Its productivity rising, its population wealth increasing. Smith attributes this not to superior genius or luck, but to institutional freedom. Britain's openness to enterprise, its relatively secure property, rights, its culture of experimentation, and exchange. These gave it the flexibility that older empires lacked. He believed progress followed a pattern. Nations thrive when they reward effort, not lineage, when they value innovation over imitation, when markets are open, and when knowledge moves faster than privilege can block it. In that sense, the Great Divergence was not destiny. It was policy, the consequence of structures that encouraged motion, where others enforced rest. Viewed from today, Smith's framework helps explain what the modern world calls the Great Reconvergence. Industrial knowledge has spread. Technology crosses borders instantly. Latecomer nations, once colonies, once peripheral, now grow faster than the old centers of power. The pattern Smith described, dash, of openness breeding growth and privilege breeding stagnation, is repeating on a global scale. East Asia industrializes, Africa urbanizes. India reawakens its markets. The tools once hoarded by empires become accessible to millions. If Smith were alive today, he would see in this shift not anomaly, but vindication. Prosperity follows productivity, and productivity follows freedom. No nation, no empire, no civilization can monopolize progress forever. 2.5 centuries later, economists still measure nations by the criteria Smith laid down. They look not at how much gold a country holds, but at how efficiently it produces, exchanges, and educates. They study institutions, the laws, schools, and customs that shape incentives. They ask whether a society rewards innovation or punishes it. In that sense, Smith's legacy is methodological. He turned economics into the study of human systems, of how trust, freedom, and fairness translate into growth. His questions still guide us. Why do some societies create opportunity, while others trap it? Why do some nations rise through openness, while others sink under protection? For Smith, the answers were never mystical. They were moral, institutional, and practical. A nation's true wealth lies not in its mines or armies, but in its capacity to let people think, trade, and build. Chapter 11. Work, Life, and what industry does to the human being. Before the Industrial Revolution, time was human. It followed the rhythm of daylight and seasons of harvests, tides, and weather. A farmer worked when the soil was ready. A weaver paused when the family needed him. Work and life were braided together, fluid, adaptive, communal. Then came the factory. With its arrival, time itself was mechanized. The new rhythm was not seasonal, but scheduled. The bell replaced the sun. The clock replaced the calendar. The day was sliced into hours, the hour into tasks, the task into repetitions. Smith notices this change before anyone gives it a name. He describes workers confined to a few simple operations, their motions dictated not by nature, but by the drumbeat of machinery. The division of labor, once a marvel of productivity, becomes a regime of time discipline. Efficiency replaces spontaneity. Human attention is reorganized to serve the machine. And from that moment onward, modern life begins to tick. Industrialization did not just reshape work, it rewrote the family. As factories expanded, their appetite for labor grew insatiable. Men alone could not fill the demand. Women and even children were drawn into the new wage economy. Smith, though writing in the 18th century, already senses this social inversion. He observes that as industry scales, tasks fragment and simplify, making them fit for almost any hand. That any hand included those who had never before been part of formal production. The home, once a unit of work and care, became an annex to the factory system. The economic map of gender began to blur. Women earned wages, children labored long hours, and traditional roles fractured under the weight of industry. Smith does not moralize, but he recognizes the transformation's scale. What had once been household labor, woven into daily life, is now bought and sold in the market. In this new order, the family becomes both a producer of workers and a casualty of work itself. As industry drew hands from the countryside, cities swelled. Glasgow, Manchester, London. Towns that once held tens of thousands soon held hundreds of thousands. Brick by brick, the modern metropolis rose, a monument to productivity and proximity. Smith witnesses the early pulse of this migration. He sees the prosperity, but also the compression, families stacked in narrow tenements, streets thick with coal smoke's disease carried faster than news. The same forces that lifted incomes also crowded souls. People who had known one another in villages became strangers, living wall to wall. Markets brought opportunity, but they also brought anonymity. Work was plentiful, but air and space were not. Smith never glamorizes the city. He calls it the great workshop of the nation. But he senses that what it builds in wealth, it may unbuild in health. The future, he knows, will live in cities, and that future will be both dazzling and diseased. Industrial work brings something new, wages as dignity. A person can now live not by birth or charity, but by what they earn with their own hands. Smith celebrates this. He sees waged labor as a foundation of independence, a way for ordinary people to rise above feudal dependence. But he also sees the shadow. In this new system, the worker's worth is constantly measured, timed, and replaced. The same division of labor that multiplies output also shrinks the worker's identity. He writes that a man whose whole life is spent in performing a few simple operations loses the habit of exertion. His mind dulls, his spirit narrows. The factory offers pride through pay and humiliation through repetition, freedom through income and confinement through structure. Smith's empathy pierces through the numbers. He knows prosperity has a human cost, and he worries that society will grow rich at the expense of its inner life. Smith does not stop at diagnosis. He prescribes a cure: education. He insists that public schooling is not charity, but survival. A nation that trains hands without minds will soon find both enslaved. He argues that repetitive labor must be balanced by intellectual nourishment. Reading, writing, and moral reasoning should be accessible to all citizens to prevent the mind from becoming torpid and unfit for any noble or generous sentiment. This, from a man writing in 1776, is revolutionary. He foresees the need for universal education before the modern state even exists. For Smith, learning is not a luxury of elites. It is the safeguard of freedom. A mind able to think cannot be wholly controlled by a clock. With industrial abundance comes something new: the democratization of desire. Goods that were once luxuries become accessible to ordinary people. Cotton shirts, metal utensils, furniture, mirrors, tokens of comfort and self-expression. Smith notes that the desire for bettering one's condition is the universal engine of progress. But in the factory age, that desire becomes a way of life. People begin to define themselves by what they can buy. Consumption becomes not just satisfaction, but identity. The new working classes seek dignity through ownership. The well-dressed laborer, the decorated home, the small luxuries that whisper status. Smith does not condemn it. He understands that consumption fuels production, but he senses the subtle danger. When things replace meaning, the soul grows light. By the end of The Wealth of Nations, a quiet melancholy runs beneath Smith's optimism. He has charted the rise of productivity, the liberation of trade, the birth of prosperity. But he also hears what has been lost in the noise. Abundance rises. So does spiritual thinness. People live longer, eat better, own more, yet seem smaller within themselves. Smith never abandons his faith in progress, but he understands its double edge. The same forces that raise wealth can flatten wonder. In the end, he leaves a question hanging in the air, one that will echo through centuries of economics and philosophy alike. What does it profit a nation to gain the world of goods and lose the depth of its people? Chapter 12. Misreading Adam Smith, 2 centuries after his death, Adam Smith has been turned into a slogan. Free markets solve everything. Government is the problem. Greed is good. None of these phrases appear in the Wealth of Nations, but they cling to his name like propaganda. Politicians quote him without reading him. Corporations invoke him to justify monopoly. Ideologues wield him as a weapon against the very balance he preached. In this caricature, Smith becomes a prophet of selfishness, a cold economist who believed morality was irrelevant, and markets would magically fix all ills. But that Smith never existed. He is a ghost conjured by those who found it convenient to strip his ideas of their conscience. The real Adam Smith was not a cheerleader for capitalism. He was its anatomist, the first to describe both its beauty and its sickness. The real Smith admired markets because they produce, not because they purify. He saw that exchange and competition could generate wealth, innovation, and freedom. But he also warned, constantly, that the same forces, left unchecked, would corrode the very society that birthed them. He lists the dangers plainly. Monopoly that rigs the game at employers who conspire to suppress wages, colonial empires built on plunder and repetitive labor that dulls the human mind. Whenever people of the same trade meet, he writes, the conversation ends in a conspiracy against the public. For Smith, capitalism without virtue is not progress. It is predation in elegant clothing. He believed prosperity must rest on justice, education, and opportunity, or it will collapse into cruelty. To understand Smith, you must return to his first book, The Theory of Moral Sentiments. There he builds the emotional architecture that supports his economics. Humans, he says, are not born greedy. They are born sympathetic. We feel each other's joys and sorrows. We moderate our behavior because we imagine how it looks through another's eyes, what he calls the impartial spectator. This moral psychology is not decoration. It is the hidden foundation of the market. Commerce works only when people trust one another, when contracts are kept, when buyers and sellers believe in fairness. Remove sympathy, and trade becomes theft. Remove trust, and markets become war zones. Smith's economics is not a moral mathematics. It is moral anthropology. He is describing how human empathy makes freedom sustainable. Smith never imagined a society that could function without an active, intelligent state. He expects governments to build what private interest will not: roads, canals, ports, and schools, the architecture of opportunity. He warns that the same forces that generate prosperity will also generate concentration of wealth, of influence, of voice. To him, the role of the state is not to smother markets, but to keep them honest. It should defend the weak from the strong, protect the worker's dignity, and ensure that education, law, and infrastructure remain public goods. A nation that leaves everything to private interest, he says, invites corruption. A nation that leaves nothing to private effort invites stagnation. True freedom lives between those extremes, where the state builds the floor and enterprise builds the walls. So how did a man of balance become the patron saint of excess? Because simplification is power. Smith says greed is good, is easier to sell than. Smith says freedom requires moral restraint. Across centuries, politicians and pundits trimmed his complexity to fit their agendas. They kept his praise of markets, but buried his warnings about monopoly and injustice. In the rush to justify profit, they amputated his compassion. Yet the full Smith, the one who believed in both liberty and responsibility, is still there in his pages, calmly explaining that capitalism without conscience devours itself. He did not write a gospel for greed. He wrote a manual for maturity, a vision of progress that keeps its soul. Chapter 13, Smith, Marx, and the Children of Capitalism. Before Marx, before Engels, before the revolutions and manifestos, there was Adam Smith, the first man to draw the map of capitalism. He charts how production actually happens, how labor, tools, and capital combine to create wealth. He dissects the anatomy of wages, profit, and rent. He sees society not as chaos, but as a machine, one powered by work, exchange, and ambition. What kings and priests had ruled by instinct, Smith renders intelligible. He turns commerce into a system that can be studied, predicted, even improved. His vision is pragmatic and moral. At once, wealth is not magic. It is the result of human cooperation. Markets are not miracles. They are mechanisms. Smith gives the modern world something new, a language to describe how ordinary self-interest becomes collective progress. He builds the foundation. Everyone after him, including Marx, will build on the terrain he mapped. A century later, Karl Marx picks up Smith's blueprint and begins to test its stress points. He agrees with Smith on the essentials. Labor creates value. Markets unlock productivity. Capitalism transforms the world. But Marx reads the same map with engineer's eyes. He says, yes, this system works, but look closer at what it runs on. Smith describes motion. Marx describes friction. He studies how profit depends on paying workers less than the value they create, how accumulation requires inequality, how crises erupt when production outpaces purchase. If Smith is capitalism's cartographer, Marx is its mechanic, diagnosing the hidden strains that will one day crack its frame. He calls Smith the greatest of the classical economists, but also its most innocent. For Marx, the invisible hand is real. It just happens to be holding a whip. Despite the centuries and the politics between them, Smith and Marx stand on remarkably similar ground. Both believe that labor is the source of value. Both see history as driven by production, by how people organize work and distribute its fruits. Both know that owners and workers live in an uneasy alliance, bound together yet forever in tension. Smith describes this tension politely as the negotiation between masters and laborers. Marx names it for what it is: class struggle. Both men recognize capitalism as revolutionary. It destroys feudal stagnation, creates wealth at unimaginable speed, and pulls the world into a single system of exchange. Where they differ is in interpretation. For Smith, this transformation is progress to be managed. For Marx, it is contradiction to be resolved. They are two voices observing the same storm. One measuring the wind, the other warning where it leads. Here is where the two great minds finally part ways. Smith believes that if markets remain free, if education lifts the poor, if government restrains monopoly and corruption, then capitalism can civilize itself. He sees injustice not as destiny, but as mismanagement, flaws that good policy and moral discipline can correct. Marx disagrees completely. He says the problem is not bad behavior, but the structure itself. In capitalism, workers must sell their labor to survive. Owners must extract more value than they pay or go under. This is not a glitch, Marx insists. It is the engine. Where Smith sees the market as a stage for self-betterment and mutual benefit, Marx sees it as a theater of compulsion where freedom exists only in appearance. Smith hopes that justice and growth can coexist. Marx argues that one will always devour the other. Beneath their economic theories lies a shared moral anxiety. What does work do to the human being? Smith asks it gently. Can wage labor respect the mind and soul of the worker? Or does it shrink them to fit the machine? He warns that repetitive labor dulls thought that the state must educate citizens to keep their humanity alive amid efficiency. Marx asks the same question, but with fury. He calls it alienation, the separation of man from his labor, from his product, from himself. For both, the modern world's triumphs come with a deep psychological toll. The factory creates wealth, but also emptiness. They differ in solutions, but agree on diagnosis: a society that forgets the dignity of labor will soon find its prosperity hollow. Both men see beyond Europe. Both understand that capitalism's heartbeat is global. Smith maps empire as commerce and credit, a world of ships, colonies, and markets. binding continents through exchange. Marx inherits that world and gives it its true name, imperialism. He sees how industrial nations enrich themselves by draining the labor and resources of others. What Smith calls trade, Marx calls extraction. Where Smith sees opportunity, Marx sees dependency. Yet both recognize the same transformation, that no nation, rich or poor, can stand apart from this expanding system. The birth of global capitalism, which began with merchants and colonies, ends in factories and revolutions. In this shared vision, Smith and Marx become reluctant partners, two prophets describing the same world, from opposite moral poles. Chapter 14, What Adam Smith Forces Us to Ask Today. 2.5 centuries later, Adam Smith is still here, not as a statue on a plinth, but as a question that refuses to die. He asks us, can a society run on self-interest and still be moral? Smith believed that sympathy and conscience could guide self-interest, that the invisible hand needed a human heart behind it. But he knew how fragile that balance is. He saw how quickly ambition turns into appetite, and how easily freedom, if unmoored from virtue, slides into greed. He asks again, how do we keep productivity without destroying minds, families, or civic life? His answer remains radical in its simplicity. Education to keep citizens awake, fairness to prevent despair, limits on monopoly to stop domination, and public works to bind a nation together. He reminds us that wealth is not the end of civilization, but its servant. That roads and schools are as vital as factories and banks. That a rich nation without educated citizens is only rich in ignorance. He asks us next, how global do we want our fates to be? Smith watched financial tremors in Scotland shake colonies across the Atlantic. We now live in that world permanently. A world where a crash in one city can empty dinner tables in another. He saw early that interdependence is power and peril at once. To trade is to trust, but to depend is to risk collapse together. He asks finally, are we heading toward growth, stagnation, or breakdown? Smith warned that nations can get stuck, that institutions can harden, elites can seal themselves off, and progress can turn to ritual. He called it the stationary state, a civilization that still moves but no longer advances. And if we look around today, at inequality, exhaustion, and disillusionment, his warning no longer feels historical. And so we end where he began, not with commerce, but with conscience. Smith did not just write about money. He wrote about how we live together without a king, how we find order without obedience, and how we build prosperity without losing our soul. He never claimed to have solved it. He only drew the first clear map and left the rest to us, to decide whether the world his ideas created will remain human or merely efficient. Thank you for staying with us through this journey into Adam Smith. Together, we've explored the birth of capitalism, not as ideology or slogan, but as a human experiment, full of insight, contradiction, and unfinished questions. Smith didn't give us certainty. He gave us a framework, a way to think about freedom, dignity, productivity, and moral responsibility in a world without kings. If this audiobook helped you see the modern world a little more clearly or think a little more deeply, then it has done its work. This has been The Infinite Archive. Thank you for listening. Thank you for your time. And thank you for choosing long-form thought in a short-form world. Until the next journey.